Hi, welcome to our session on the satisfaction of a simple binding. My name's Catherine and I'm an archive conservator who works at the Borthwick Institute for Archives at the University of York. And I'm going to be hosting this session today with Emma, who I'll let introduce herself.
Well, yes, I'm Emma. I've been a book and paper conservator for over 30 years, working for libraries and archives around the country. But I'm now self-employed and I have clients like English Heritage, Wilberforce House Museum in Hull, York Explore here in York, and Doncaster Museums, Chatsworth House. So they're the sort of clients I do work for currently.
So we're really excited to talk to you today about the structure, the link stitch structure that we posted an instructional video for on the Festival of Ideas website. And so I'm going to just give you a bit of an intro on the technical notes. So should you have any technical issues, such as a loss of Wi-Fi, you can rejoin the event using the original link. Subtitles are available in this event, so to turn these on or off, if you use the CC Live transcript button, which is a button at the bottom of your screen. If you're watching the event live, you're going to be able to type questions at any time into the Q&A function, which is also a button at the bottom of your screen. And these will come through to us. That's available throughout the event, so they'll come through to us, and there's going to be opportunities for us to answer those questions. And also, if you'd like to appear on screen at all and share your work or share any of the experiences you might have had with following the instructions that we've posted, or any other kind of binding experiences you might have, then you can indicate that you'd like to appear on screen and talk to us by using the raise hand function, which again is at a button at the bottom of the screen. If you do appear on screen, please note that under 18s must have an adult present. And please remember to warn any other members of your household that you're going to be taking part, and check that you're happy for your background to be visible. We also recommend you use first names only, and that you don't include anything that identifies your home address. So, and remember, you can switch off your camera and or your microphone at any time as well. So the format of the event today, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a really brief recap of the structure and just go over a little bit of the language and terminology we use to describe the structure. And we're also going to do a very quick kind of recap, or well, a slightly different angle view of the weaver's knot. So one of the knots that we talk about in the video, we thought it might be interesting to see it from a different angle and talk through how to do that again. Whilst we're talking through those things, if you want to put any questions into the Q&A, that would be fantastic. And if you would like to appear on screen and chat to us, if you could raise your hand, and then once we've done that recap, we'll be able to answer any of those questions and do that. After any of those questions, if we've got time after that, we've got a couple of demos of some different things you can do to embellish the bindings you've got and strengthen and take them that one step forward. So we'll do those demonstrations and talk through those techniques. And again, if there's any questions or anything, you'll have chance and time, so you can put your questions in the chat and then we can answer them after the demos. Right, so I shall start with the structure and the terminology. So the instructions that we gave on the very first page talked through terminology and kind of how a book comes into being. So what I've got here is just a single sheet of paper, and it's been folded in half. There we go, just a single sheet folded, and that is what we would call one bifolio. Now, in order to make up a section, we'd have multiple bifolios, and we'd feed them all into each other. So there's 3 bifolios there, and that would make up one section. And we'd then use multiple sections. So we've got lots of sections there, you can see. And those sections, that makes up a text block. And it's the text block that you then sew. And it's a link stitch technique that we've shown in the video to sew that, but there's lots, and apologies, I find a clearer view of the stitches there of the link stitch. And then it's when you add the boards, your cover onto your text block, that's how it then becomes a book. So that's what the instructions in the video show. They show you the step-by-step how to go from your single sheets to your sections, to your text block, and then to your book. Right, so I'm just going to swap with Emma now so that she can just talk to you a little bit about the weaver's knot, which is how you join thread to each other.
Well, it was just a sort of follow-up note really on the weaver's knot. I mean, if any of you out there are knitters, then you'll know that when you're casting on, you do a slip knot, and that is part of the weaver's knot, except that you keep the knot at the bottom quite loose to take your joining thread through. I'm going to try and show it to you on screen. So just to recap, but it's going to be quite tricky for me. So you've got the thread in both hands. You pass your right hand over the thread in your left hand. Just create another loop. Is that, can you see that, Catherine? Is it coming through? And you're pushing it into the loop you've already created. Now that is basically the first knot in your weaver's knot. I mean, it was called a weaver's knot because it's how they joined threads when they were weaving. Your joining thread passes through the top loop.
As I say, if you just, yeah, that's it.
Sorry, I'm busy watching what I'm doing, not what's on the screen. And then this tightens and locks the other one in place, and so it shouldn't slip. So that's firmly locked then, because it pulls it through into that bottom the space in the bottom knot. But yeah, I think it's called various things, but if you think of a slip knot to begin with, and look up instructions on that. But I think the drawing that Catherine gave in her notes was pretty clear as well. But some people do struggle with that, but it is a useful knot to use because it won't slip out, and you can place it in an exact position as well when you're joining, when you're doing your sewing.
So I've checked the Q&A, so we haven't had any questions submitted to the Q&A yet. So do feel free if you've had any, if you tried the technique at all, or even just wanted to make any comments, we'd love to hear. And I can't see any raised hands either. So again, if you want to talk at all about any of the things that you've been doing, that'd be great. But as we don't have anything so far, shall I go straight on to the first demo? So what we thought was the next sensible step on from your link stitch binding is giving it a bit more support and a bit more strength. So you'll find once you've made it that it does kind of wobble around a bit, and also when you open it you do tend to get gaps between your sections where you can see the thread. So what you would the first thing you might consider to strengthen it is to add linings to the spine. And you don't necessarily have to go over the sewing, you can just go round it. So I'm going to switch my screen over to a camera and you can see what I've been doing. Right, so here you can see I've got my link stitch binding. Now I've got it here in a finishing press, and that is simply so that I can angle it for the camera to see it. But you wouldn't need a press to do this. You could simply put it on the very edge of the table and maybe have a board and a weight on top just to compress it slightly. But that would be, it would be access to the spine that you need, which you could get on the edge of the table. I've also got here an added extravagance, an added embellishment of some ribbon. And I thought I could add a bookmark because I'm going to be lining, putting some lining on the spine. I thought I could add a bookmark that will be adhered to the spine, and then it will be long enough to go into the book. So I'm just going to trim this, and then I'd like it about that long. So it's long enough to hang out of the bottom. And then I've got my glue here. This is just some EVA, but it's just a white glue, so you could use PVA or wood glue or something similar. There's the same sort of glue that we've been describing for the binding, adhering the covering material to the boards on the binding.
Can you share what you're doing there, Catherine?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Emma.
Sorry.
So no, it's good. I appreciate it. So I am adhering, I'm putting the adhesive with my brush onto the spine folds of the sections. And I've applied it fairly generously, because the other thing that helps strengthen the spine in this situation is the tiny bits of glue that go between the sections. They also help with the flexibility and the strength of the book as it opens. And then if I get my ribbon, I'm going to stick it on as far down as this kettle stitch, but I'm not going to go over the kettle stitch because that might make it a little bit too bulky. There we go. And I'm just going to use my bone folder to give it a good rub down, make sure it's really well in contact with the spine. Sorry, are my fingers still in the way, Emma?
No, it's clear.
Okay. And then for my spine linings, I found a paper that it's fairly robust, but it's still fairly flexible. So you wouldn't want it too thick, like a card, because it's not going to give you the flexibility when the book opens. And the other thing I've done is I have cut a strip. So I've measured the width of the spine by literally putting the paper on top of the spine and marking the width of the spine on the paper. And you can see there the excess of how the width that I cut out. And I did the same. To be honest, I wanted it to be nice and even, so I measured I measured it onto the book and marked it, and then I used a ruler to actually measure how far across I had marked, and added another one at the bottom. So if I find my pencil, I could actually do this quickly. I've got too many questions at the moment. So I marked it on. And I measured that to find that that was 9 millimeters. And then I marked 9 millimeters. And I've also, I should probably say this, and Emma's going to tell me if I'm not saying this first. The paper is with the grain, so you want the grain to be in line with the spine. You want the grain to go from the head to the tail of the book with the spine. So the grain on this paper, I've checked that the grain goes that way from head to tail, so that when I put it on the book, the grain goes from head to tail. Then I've measured out where I need. I'm going to find my scalpel or craft knife, which is in a nice little cover to keep it safe, stop me injuring myself.
There is a film on grain direction for those of you who have seen the instructions on the binding, but may not have watched the film on grain direction. So if you watch that, you'll understand what Catherine's talking about.
And then again, I would personally just measure it onto the volume, but you can use your ruler, your metal rule, and measure where you would want, how big your sections would want to be. But you can equally, it's fairly accurate for you to measure it onto the volume too. So put it on and mark. And I would like my sewing to still be exposed, because I think the sewing is quite pretty. So I'm going to mark here, and then I would like a section in the middle too, here, and then a section at the end to the very bottom. So I've cut those pieces out again with my craft knife. I'll just put my craft knife away. into its case. And then again, I'm going to apply the adhesive onto the spine of the book and then the paper onto the adhesive. So I start here, apologies, to try and do it left-handed. And you can go right the way with the ribbon. Just stick the paper on there and make sure. What I would do as well in this situation is actually use my finger as well as a brush to really make sure that the adhesive's gone into the spine folds, slightly between the spine folds. But what I would avoid, if you can, is getting adhesive into your sewing holes, into your sewing stations, because that can then seep into the pages and make them stick together inside. Oops. Put my piece on. Make sure it's in the right place. Oops. Make sure that my press is tight enough. And then again, with my bone folder, or this one's actually a Teflon folder, I'm really going to rub that paper down really firmly, and I'm going to shape it around the kettle. So do remember, if your kettle is slightly larger, you might need enough paper to go over the kettle. And then I'd repeat that for the middle section and the bottom, and that lining of the spine will just give the volume that bit more support when it's opening, and it'll support that a little better. And now I'm going to hand over to Emma to talk to you about support again, a little bit more support again.
I've got a text block here which has been sewn in a similar way with the link stitch, and you can see, you can just see the shadow of the stitching, but the spine is lined, and it does give that bit of extra support when you're opening. It still opens down to the joint, but it does give a bit of extra support. So that's what Catherine's aiming for when she's lining the spine. If you're, this is similar to the instructions that you've been given, if you're going to make a binding any bigger than, say, about, I would say A5, which is like half a sheet of printer paper, that sort of size, you might want to start thinking about supporting the sewing. You're still using the same sort of sewing structure, the link stitch, as we have here, but behind the link stitch there would be some tape, and that gives much more support to the spine. And that's what I've got here. I don't know if you can see tapes there. So again, it is a link stitch sewing. It's harder to see because I've used a cream thread. If you can see that it does add more strength anyway if you're going larger than the A6 size or A5 size, and also you can go with more sections as well. This makes it a more robust sewing. But in using tapes, you need to perhaps, you can just work round the tapes without supporting the tapes in any way, but we usually use something called a sewing frame. I've got a very simple one here, if you can see that, which is basically a base, a wooden base, and it's this arch here moves when the wing nuts are undone, so it folds flat. I mean, you don't need to have it folding flat. If anyone's handy with woodwork, you could make just a base with a which is slightly raised, with the tape support going over the top, held by these two uprights here. And to this we attach the tape onto which we sew. So the book is placed on this bed here, and you sew round the tapes, and it just supports the tapes whilst you're sewing. Now you can do that without a frame, but if you're wanting to take your skills further, then using this sort of sewing frame would help you. The sort of sewing frame, stand away a bit now, the sort of sewing frame we use is, and has been traditionally used for a lot of years, is this sort of sewing frame. So again, it's a wooden base with two upright screws and then a crossbar, and the sewing tape, or sometimes sewing cord, gets tied to this crossbar, fastened to this crossbar, and then fastened below through this slot here using something called sewing keys. But what we've tried to do with this instructional video is keep tools, equipment to a minimum and make it more accessible to everybody. So that's why we haven't gone into using sewing frames. But if you want to take it a stage further, it might be something that you would want to look at.
We've actually, funnily enough, Emma, had a question about binding many papers. How can we bind up many papers? And that's, I think that would depend on whether those papers were individual sheets of papers.
That's right, yeah.
Or whether they were folded. So if you had, for example, just a sheet of papers, so this is actually the instructions from online, printed out as a reminder for me. If you had just a sheet, a pile of papers like that, in order to bind up the edge, you would either need to use an adhesive so you'd line them all up and you'd apply adhesive to all of them.
It's like a paperback.
Yeah, like a paperback, exactly. But they're not a particularly robust or long-lasting structure because the adhesive can go and there's not much holding the pages together. So you could also stab stitch along the one edge.
You want to,
oh yeah, that's perfect, Emma, thank you. So you can see that the binding that Emma is holding up on the left-hand side of the binding, there's thread. And that thread has stitched right the way through.
A two-piece covering. So you have your main board, but then you've got another strip of the same board here.
I think we might have. Oh, there you are. Yeah, I've got you.
And the sewing is punctured through that strip of board. So you've got the hinge here, but this is, yes, all single sheets, as you were saying, Catherine.
So the next stage on, so what we've been doing in this particular example structure, we've been using sections. So as I said at the beginning, a section is made up of lots of single sheets that are folded and they are passed into each other. I don't know how easy that is to see, but you can see there's one there and there's another one inside it. Ooh, it's very difficult to get the angles. There we go. Another one inside it and then another one inside that too, to make up a section. And more fingers and thumbs. And then it's lots of sections to make up your text block. And then because you've got these folds, you can actually sew through the fold. And it's sewing through the fold that attaches this one section to another. So if you've got lots of sections, so if you've got many pages, you've got lots and lots of sections, then you sew one to the other, as we've described in the video with thread. But what Emma's just been talking about is if you have a much larger structure, then you need to start supporting it with more than just the sewing, and you need, as Emma's just described, you need the tapes, and you might need kind of some sort of spine linings possibly as well.
Just to come back to the stab sewing, this is like a Japanese style stab sewing. So this is a paper cover, so no hinge as such. It just opens, but doesn't open very well. It only opens to the sewing. I mean, some of these Japanese bindings, they have quite elaborate stitching, so aesthetically they look very pleasing, but as a functioning book, it doesn't open very well.
Someone's actually just asked as well about what type of thread we'd use, Emma. So I don't know if you want to talk a little, because I think you've got the 2 threads that we've been using for the...
I have somewhere, yes, yeah. Well, as bookbinders, we buy from suppliers, we buy a linen thread, but I think these are like saddle threads, or for sewing leather anyway, so it's a very, but again, a linen thread. Bookbinding thread comes in lots of different weights, which we need during the bookbinding process for various reasons, which are sort of getting more complicated. But linen thread is available online, and not in very many colours. Now I've got another thread I showed you, the kettle stitch with. I think this is a cotton thread, but that would be suitable because there's no give in it, and it's also quite a smooth surface, so it would be quite easy to sew with, but it is quite heavy. But if you were wanting to do a stab stitch binding, sewing along the spine edge, sewing single sheets, this would be ideal to use.
So you could technically, you could do a binding with normal sewing thread, but you might find it it would have no give, which is good, but you might find it quite thin, and you might find it cuts through the paper.
Cut through the paper, and probably wouldn't be strong enough for a functioning binding as well.
So you might find it snaps as you try and tension it and pull it along. So you probably need a bit thicker, for the, certainly for the structure that we've been talking about.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a question here for the Japanese binding. Could you be untraditional and score the pages just outside the binding using a scoring board before sewing up?
You could do that. Scoring too much, though, you're going to weaken the paper, I think. So in opening repeatedly, that will eventually weaken and may break depending on the paper you're using. But it'll last longer if the grain direction is going the right way. So I know we keep coming back to grain direction, but it is pretty essential that you understand it and use it to your advantage. Books are bound all the time with the grain direction going across from spine to foredge, and we know that these break down over time, and also they're not very easy to open. So I would still, and the paper tears more, well, it would just weaken it anyway if you were going to score it, because you're sort of damaging the paper. I know we fold the paper, but it's not actually scored. I know what you're meaning, what the question was. I do think it would create a weakness there, but yes, it will be possible to do that.
There's also been a question saying, could you send the name of books that you'd recommend? I'm assuming that means books on how to do certain bindings and certain binding structures, and I'm sure that we could, Emma and I could put together a list. We can certainly supply
that, yes.
Yeah, and send it out afterwards with the recording of this session.
Yeah, absolutely, and it wouldn't be any books by people that we know. They'd just be books that I think work well instructionally, are clear in their instructions as well.
And another question has just been about a link to the thread that they can buy on Amazon. There is some details about the materials and where to find them and what materials to use on the instructions. So if you go to the festival website and you go to throughout the festival page, our instructional video and the video about grain direction and a PDF as well of the instructions can be found under the satisfaction of a simple binding on that page. So, but I'm sure as well we could add, we could maybe attach the PDF of the instructions, which has that information about materials and equipment.
Certainly add bookbinding suppliers.
Yeah. Oh, fab. And Naomi, our backup from the festival has just put a link actually to that that page onto the chat if anyone wants to find that.
But when we, from bookbinding supplies, you normally buy in bigger quantities than some people might be wanting to use. So we'll add those as well, but we'll, yeah, I think there's been some suggestions of where you can buy thread. I think Hobbycraft is one place, you know, somewhere on the high street that's not too overpriced.
We don't have any more questions at the moment, and we don't have any raised hands. So shall I just do that final example, that
Yes,
demo
please.
Example? Right, so the next thing we just thought, the next thing you could do with the existing bindings that you've got is to add a cover that covers the spine. So if you wanted to put any text or labeling on the spine of the book, so obviously when it's an exposed, you don't have any space to put any information on it. Or if, like me, sometimes you might have done your binding. So I threw this together last week, and I managed to put my boards on slightly skew if. So my you can see that top section is a bit bigger than the others, and also I've not done it very carefully, and so I don't know if you can see very well. You might be able to see very in a moment under the camera. My sections haven't all lined up at the head, so it looks a little bit messy. What you can do is you can make a little dust jacket, a little cover to go over it, and that'll cover over some of the bits and pieces that you might not be as happy with. So if I just move back to my overhead camera, so you can see maybe a little bit better there how these sections look a bit uneven, and that's because when I've been sewing it, I haven't been careful enough about knocking it up to the head and laying my sections on top of each other carefully enough, and as a result they've kind of all gone a little bit woo, a little bit way, and so I'm going to put a dust jacket around it. What I've done is I've cut this piece. This is actually this is card, but as long as it's a fairly chunky, robust paper, that should be enough as long as you've got boards to support it. So I have attached my boards as we described in the instructions, and then I've cut this, and I've cut it to the height of my volume, and I've actually been a bit cheeky and I've cut it about 1 millimetre taller, so it should take into account those uneven edges a little bit at the head and the tail of the volume. I've also cut it so that the spine will be, so the grain, back to the grain again, will be running from the head to the tail of the volume. So the grain, you can see it runs that way, and it resists, it's a bit more resistant that way. It's much happier folding that way. Right, and then rather than measure this all out with our metal rule, I'm going to measure it directly onto the book. So I'm going to line my volume, my book onto the strip of card that I've cut, and I'm going to, in fact, I'll just do it with a pencil. I'm going to mark where I'd like my first turn-in to be. So I'd like the turn-in to come to hook round the board about there. And now I'm just going to fold my turn-in, that's my very first one. I'm going to fold it at that point. And in order to get a nice perpendicular line, I am going to make sure that these two edges are completely lined up with one another. And then I'm going to use my bone folder to fold that first crease. Now, if you are more confident with measuring and you're not as confident with folding, you can measure where how far you want your first turn-in to be and do the same at the top. And then you can put your metal rule across and line up your two markings, and then use your bone folder to bring up that line, and then remove the metal rule once you've got a bit of a crease to actually score it down. So that's, both techniques can be accurate, but if you're more confident actually measuring, then you can do it that way. But if you think that you've got control enough over your folding and you've got nice pressure on there, you can just do it without. Right, and then if I place my volume inside the turn-in. Now, if you've got any depth to your boards, you might need to do more than one crease here. So you might need to do 2 creases to take in the depth of the board. This is a fairly thin board, so I can just get away with doing 1 crease. And then I'm going to close the book down onto that turn-in, and then I'm going to lift this side, and I'm going to just literally pull it up and crease along that first piece of spine, and then I'm going to fold it across, and again just give a crease, and they only need to be light creases at this point because you're going to take it off and recrease them properly. So, and then I'm going to do the same there, and then I'm going to take out the volume, the book, and then you can see there my creases. I can actually simply, and again I'm lining up my bottom edge to make sure everything is going to end up perpendicular, and then do the creases properly with my bone folder. Also, I'm trying to line everything up to the bottom. There we go. And then again, for neatness' sake, you can measure the turn-ins and you can trim. So this turn-in is 39 millimeters. So then I can make sure you can see what I'm doing. Measure it to 39. Oh, no, measure it from this side to 39. That will give me a very internal. But this is more, I mean, it's, you don't have to have them exactly the same. It's more for neatness' sake, really. And then just going over actually what we were talking about with the with cutting on the instructional video, making sure that all of your pressure should be on the hand that's in control of the metal rule, and your hand that's holding the scalpel actually cuts quite lightly, and you don't necessarily need to go through cut it entirely in one cut. You can do multiple cuts lightly with the scalpel, and you will eventually go through the material, and that will actually give you a much neater cut than trying to do it in one go. And then we can fit our dust jacket. Yes, I'm tucked away in the scalpel, and we can fit our dust jacket onto the book. There we go. And then you've got somewhere, if you want any lettering on your spine, and you've got a nice clean cover, and you've hidden a multitude of sins. There we go. I would recommend, once you've got your dust jacket on as well, you can see that it's lifting a little bit there. You probably want to give that a good old press again as well. We like to do a lot of pressing as well in binding to make sure everything is happy and acclimatized to the structure that you've given it. But as well, if it is raising a little bit, it could need, you might need to go over the folds a little bit more again too. Right, I'm going to come back onto the screen.
You could add a 4-edge tie to your wrapper, create the wrapper as Catherine's just described, and then I've actually got something called a Japanese screw punch. I don't know if you can see on the inside that I've taken this ribbon through over onto the spine of the book, but comes through both the wrapper and the board, and it holds the wrapper to the binding. You just thread it through and then tie it on the foredge. You can do as many as you want. You could have 2 is more traditional, but you could have as many as you want. But this is a Japanese screw punch. I think they're quite commonly available now, but vary in quality. But it does operate on that screw basis. You just press down onto your surface, and it will cut through a card that's quite thick. It gives just a really neat hole, and the ends come in. I think the range is 1 to 5 millimeters. So, but it's just a lovely tool for creating those holes when you need them.
You can also, Emma was showing you the ribbon, the ties, the forage ties and the ribbon round. You can use all sorts of materials for that too. So I copied Emma's structure here with a little volume. So again, you can see it's got the dust jacket, and it's a much thicker. And I've actually, funnily enough, used the screw punch at the top and the bottom to give neat entry holes.
It's a good way to start and then to cut, isn't it?
Yeah, and then cut between them.
Slot.
So
yeah.
Cut a slot between them to feed the ribbon through. So yeah, you can get quite creative.
Inside of the board, Catherine.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
So it's fairly neat, but it's functional.
Yeah, we there was a question, Emma. It says that you suggested using saddle thread instead of standard sewing thread. Does the same go for glue? Is there a better choice of glue to use in some instances on a binding? I found some PVA glue to be more like wallpaper paste and not fit for purpose.
Well, we use something very similar to PVA. It's called EVA, but we don't, as conservators, we don't use it in contact with any original archival material. Well, wood glue, I think I didn't know that PVA varied so much, but it's either PVA or wood glue or white glue. And I think if it's got more of a texture of wallpaper paste, I think it's probably not very good adhesive, but I can't imagine what that is. But just your standard PVA or wood glue should be adequate. I don't know if you can suggest anything else, Catherine, any other adhesive?
Not that I can think of, because I'd use the same. I think the only thing I'd say is that, as Emma was saying, in conservation, we wouldn't necessarily use those glues in contact with any archival material. We'd use things like wheat starch pastes and various starch pastes, well, for cellulose-based repair kind of things. And the benefit of those, which you can kind of just cook up with flour and paste, there'll be things online that you can find, but is that they've got a slightly longer, or an extended drying time. So the issue I find with some of the PVAs and the EVAs is that they dry so quickly, you haven't got any adjustment time. Whereas a starch paste is slightly slower, but I don't know whether there are commercial versions, small scale commercial versions of wheat starch paste. I don't know if you can think of any, Emma.
I'm sure there must be, but I think you could just use flour.
Yeah, I was just thinking, cook up flour and water.
Flour and water, or corn
Yeah.
flour. Corn flour will be a sort of slightly less, be a bit more translucent.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Someone's also mentioned, can we send the link for buying a screw punch? And I'm sure we could add that in with the recommendations of books and things like
mine
that.
came from bookbinding suppliers. I know you can get them online.
I'm pretty sure there's hobby kind of sort of stores that you would be able to get them from. I think
the main body of the punch won't vary so much, but I think it's just the end fittings, the tips, the actual punch that will vary in strength. And I know I bought some from China before. I don't know if I should say that, but the ends have been sort of serrated even when they arrived. They just didn't cut very well. So I think just go by the rule. Just buy the best you can afford. I think that's what I'd say.
There was also, sorry Emma.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say there was also, someone's mentioned some paper craft suppliers have screw punches. Yeah, that's the same. That's what I was thinking about, the hobbycraft sort of suppliers. Someone's also asked, do you think TV programs such as The Repair Shop have encouraged more people to engage in this sort of activity, either as a hobby or professionally?
I don't know. I mean, I think they have, but I think it's certainly made more people engaged with repair and conservation and restoration, more restoration. But certainly in our profession, in Catherine's and my profession, there is a distinct lack of courses where you can go and learn. The course I did no longer exists. I think that's to do with funding more than anything, but there is a need out there for people like us. So yes, I think that the interest is there, but the courses are not. So
I think it's interesting as well. There's been an awful lot of talk professionally about the repair shop. I've heard lots and lots of different types of conservators talking about it, and there's fairly strong opinions on it, because there's quite a restoration focus on it, and
well, that's the thing, isn't it?
Restoring items is actually kind of maybe restoring their function, restoring their colours, adding materials in, whereas I know in archive conservation and in various other conservation professions, we concentrate very much on preservation, so preserving what is there, but not trying to change it and restore it for various reasons.
That's the difference between restoration and conservation. Yeah. We're just trying to make something last longer, make it, in the case of books, make it usable or exhibitable, maybe, but not restoring to its former glory. Just giving it, making it go on for another few centuries, maybe.
As long as we can. There aren't any more questions at the moment, and there aren't any raised hands. So just to say, it's 10 to 2. So if anyone does have any last burning questions, do
not burning. I've got no burning answers, but just to another couple of pieces of kit. When Catherine was showing in the instructional video how to create the holes through which you sew in your sections, online again, this is something called it's called a cradle, hole punching cradle, and this is one. There are instructions online which I'll try and find and add to the other notes, but this is something you can make yourself. And what you do is you sit your section into the cradle and pierce, so it's held in there, pierce your holes, sewing through. It's cloth in the bottom, so your needle or awl or your pin vise will go through and create the holes. It's a simple thing to make, but you can also get them online, I think on eBay, which is sort of in MDF form, a similar thing. Again, there's a slight gap between these two pieces of MDF, so your awl, your needle or your pin vise, your pin will go through when you're puncturing the holes. Quite a useful bit of kit. Catherine, when she was making the holes, just put the section on the edge of the bench, didn't you, Catherine, or on a board on the edge of the bench?
Yeah.
Make the holes. With the cradle, though, of course, they're held in position, so it's quite a useful piece of kit and not too expensive. And if you can make your own, if you're handy in that. The other thing I wanted to show you is just these, which are, if you want weights for holding your sections in position when you're sewing them. This is just a doorstop. I think it cost about £8. Buy them online or somewhere like Homebase or maybe even B&Q will sell them. I don't know. I've had these a while, but a good heavy weight, and also quite. I know when we were talking about materials in the films, we suggested I think a tin of tuna or a kitchen weight. But fewer and fewer people have kitchen weights because they're not used. We're all these digital scales. So yeah, I think that's another good heavyweight.
What I would just add to that is because I bought one of those and it had lots of ridges in the bottom. So if you are using a weight like that,
did too, but I just lined it with some.
Yeah, or you can just make sure you're using a board or something over the between that and the item.
But it's a good heavyweight, isn't it, Catherine?
Yeah.
When you're sewing and when you're creating the hold as well.
Keep things in place. Someone's asked, what is it called, this board? I'm assuming that was the board that Emma was talking about for the sewing jig.
All right, well, this is a conservation board from a conservation supplier, but you could, I think it wouldn't be very robust, but you could even use like a box, a corrugated box to make this. I mean, you'd have to adjust the measurements to, because it all slots together. This comes sort of apart now, so you can see it's a flat piece and the support ends slot into it and rests on these ridges here. But I think you could just use, I think you can buy grey board. It's something called grey board in small quantities. And if you choose one that's about 2 millimeters in depth, I think that would be a suitable alternative. This you have to buy in larger quantities, but certainly a grey board, I think you can get sheets cut to size as well.
Someone's just said, can we send the name? We'll find, yeah, we can find that.
We'll include all the information, yes.
Yeah, because when we were putting together the video, we wanted it to be as accessible for kind of things that you could find around the house.
That's right.
As possible. But yeah, if you want specific suppliers for things, I'm sure we can find names and links for people to go directly to those. Yeah.
Well, I think we're sort of coming to a close now, aren't we? And I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. But we would really, this is the first time Catherine and I have made an instructional video about bookbinding. So we'd really welcome anyone's comments, criticism, good comments or bad, just so we know how to take this forward. And if you want to tell us maybe how old you are, if you've had craft experience before, just so we know how to tone it if we do it again, that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
I think you've got I think my email address was sent through for a contact if you have any feedback and any.
I'm quite happy to give mine as well if that is.
And additionally, we'd love to see if any of you give it a go. We'd love to see pictures. Yeah, I'm afraid we don't have. Oh yeah, that my email address has just got into my official University of York one's just gone into the chat. Thank you, Naomi. And yeah, we were hoping maybe to see some examples of where you might have got to, or what sort of materials you might have chosen to use. And even after this session, if you do have any thoughts or examples or pictures, we would be really keen to see them.
Yeah, keep talking to us.
And also the recording of this event is going to be available on the festival YouTube channel, which can be accessed from the Watch Again section of the festival website after the 20th of June. And you'll be contacted by email when the video is available to view. And hopefully we'll also have all of the additional information that we've just been talking about kind of products and books and things attached to that as well. And also we very much hope that you'll continue to be engaged with the York Festival of Ideas. There's tons more things out there. Check out the website yorkfestivalofideas.com for full details of all the events. I think that will be going, that link will be going in the chat too. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on these events and continue the conversations using the hashtag York Ideas. And yeah, as I said, Emma and I would love to hear from you too. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.